Welcome to the Lancaster County Democrats. My name is Barbara Baier, and our show today is The Watchful Citizen. We're interviewing Kevin Fulton, and he is a farmer owner of Fulton Farms, and that's out at Litchfield, Nebraska. He traveled 2.5 hours to be with us today. We're really excited to have you, Kevin. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with animal welfare rights.
Okay, I'll go back in time a little bit and tell you that I was that my family has been involved in farming for as long as we can trace back. My grandparents immigrated to Nebraska from Northern Ireland.
Oh, really?
And then,
wow.
Bought a farm on the Kansas side, south of Superior, Nebraska. And my father grew up on that farm, and then later on he became a veterinarian, moved to central Nebraska, Sherman County, where he started to practice veterinary medicine and buying farmland. And when I was growing up, we had one of the largest farming operations in our county, and I also helped my dad on that operation as well as in his veterinary practice. So I had some unique experiences being able to ride around the country, and go to a lot of different farms and help him treat sick animals and care for animals. Growing up, those days were like were pretty typical of a lot of farm boys. I grew up helping with the livestock, heavily involved in sports, 4-H, FFA, and any spare time I had was doing things like, riding horses and hunting pheasants and those kinds of things. So a lot like a lot of Nebraska people have experienced over the years. And then as I got older, I went off to college and got a degree in animal science from Kansas State. Went on a few years later, got a master's degree out at Colorado State. And along the way, I worked for 2 different universities, as well as the USDA in various capacities. And then in 1993, I came back to the farm. I was living in Massachusetts. I moved back to the farm and started to take over the operation, renting the ground from my father, and was primarily involved in the cropping part of the operation. Farming conventionally, just like everybody else around. And then after doing that for a few years, I became a little bit disillusioned, and we started to move towards a more sustainable, grass-based operation. We started to bring livestock back onto the land.
Oh, okay.
And then from there, we gravitated to grass-finishing cattle and into organic production, which brings us to where I am today with multiple enterprises, cattle, both beef, dairy, sheep, goats, pigs, poultry, and we brought more people onto the land, certainly a lot more animals back onto the land, which sort of reverses the trend that we see in today's livestock industry, concentrations and stuff. To answer your question specifically about how did I get involved in animal rights, I've always been concerned about animal welfare, and that comes from my father and my mother. When I was in graduate school, I happened to meet a person who's sort of become one of my mentors, and he's probably the most recognized person in the world in regards to animal welfare, and he's at Colorado State University. His name's Dr. Bernard Rollin.
Okay.
And Bernie Rollin has written probably a dozen books or more on animal welfare, and some of them specifically about farm animal welfare. And I got very acquainted with him. We got to be friends. I got to be friends with his family, and that's kind of where a lot of this started, in trying to look at some of the alternatives when we're raising livestock where we can provide the most humane conditions that we can. So, and that's sort of a...
Well, tell us a little bit about, because I come from the farm. I'm going to back up for a moment. I come from the farm originally. We had a dairy operation in northeast Nebraska years ago. And I think a lot of people, a lot of the public does not realize the living conditions of a lot of farm animals. Could you describe to us what confinement type farming is doing?
Well, I'll first explain the term CAFO, which is Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation.
Okay.
And those operations are a lot of times somewhat synonymous with factory farming, where we have this mentality of, I would say, assembly line mentality, where we put animals in very high densities inside buildings, and we confine them in extreme confinement in cages and crates. And we have this mentality where as long as we provide them with the basic food, water, and shelter, that's all they need. I think that's where we make a huge mistake, that animals need more than just those few basic needs. They need to be able to exhibit some of their natural behaviors, and we've not allowed them to do that. We've taken animals off the land and moved them on into these animal concentration camps and put them in these somewhat horrendous conditions in a lot of cases, and taken their dignity away from them and not allowed them to exhibit their natural behavior. And that's had a lot of problems, not only with the animals, but even with our rural economies. And I do some presentations on looking at the movement of correlating the movement of the people and the animals off the land. And that's been one of the major reasons for our demise of rural communities.
Now, that's a really interesting point that you make. The movement of animals into confinement is directly related to the movement of people off of the farmland. That's a huge concern because we're having a concentration of farmland ownership, and it's almost becoming a closed system. It's not a free market anymore. Well, tell us about a little bit more about the impact of factory farming that you described. Is there environmental impact?
Well, there's problems in a number of different sectors. There's the environmental problems, and if you would go and do a Google search, you'll come up with hundreds of thousands of responses to that can inform you about the environmental problems with CAFOs or factory farming. The other thing is the humane conditions for the animals. Another problem is food safety. Another problem is food security.
Oh, really?
And then the other thing is the social impacts in terms of things like decreasing the property value of people that live around these operations and the movement of those people off the land as farms got bigger and bigger and the animals moved off too, that we just talked about. So there's a lot of different things going on at once, and the animal rights issues or animal welfare, whatever you want to call it, is only one factor that contributes to the multitude of problems that are associated with these operations.